"It's happening again," he whispered to the empty room. "The ghost in the machine." For 6 months, the global network had been suffering from packet loss that defied physics. Data wasn't being dropped, it was being translated. Secure encryptions were melting away, replaced by a rhythmic, pulsing code that looked like jagged teeth. When Leo ran the audio conversion on the glitch, he didn't hear static. He heard the sound of footsteps, a steady pounding, thud, 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 thud. "Someone is running through the fiber optics," Leo muttered, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't know he was listening to the echo of Kalen. The silence had moved into the digital void, feeding on the billions of selfies, deleted emails, and forgotten passwords. It was building a new spire, not of obsidian, but of information. The discovery of the Sentinel. Meanwhile, in the swamps of the south, a drone piloted by Maya, the archaeologist from the earlier chapters, crashed into a restricted zone. When she went to recover it, she found the Blackwater had receded due to a record drought. There, standing in the mud, was Zali. The stone woman didn't look like a relic, she looked like a circuit. The indigo tattoos on her granite skin were glowing with a faint electric blue. Maya reached out, her own silver scar thrumming with a heat she hadn't felt since childhood. The moment her fingers touched the stone, the wire and the earth collided. The digital breach. In Chicago, Leo's monitors exploded into white light. The silence had found its bridge. Through Maya's touch, the ancient memory of the Sun Clan surged into the global internet. Suddenly, every screen in the world flickered. For 3 minutes, the noise of the modern world stopped. TikToks froze, news broadcasts went silent, stock tickers went flat. Instead of advertisements, the world saw a vision of Cahokia. 3 billion people watched as the great mounds rose from the digital mist. They saw the runner crossing the Grand Plaza. They felt the weight of the unspoken dream. The silence tried to fight back, flooding the network with billions of terabytes of nonsense to drown out the vision, but it was too late. The root had been uploaded. The Shadow's final virus. The Shadow, the entity that had haunted Kalen, realized it could no longer keep the world from remembering, so it pivoted. If it couldn't make the world forget, it would make the world go mad with the truth. It began to corrupt the digital vision. The beautiful images of the ancient city started to warp. The faces of the Sun Clan turned into the eyeless masks of the Pale Ones. The rhythmic heartbeat of the runner was overlaid with a screeching, high-pitched frequency designed to shatter human sanity. "It's weaponizing the memory," Leo screamed, frantically trying to pull the master kill switch on the servers. But the servers weren't responding to commands. They were responding to blood. The blood code. In the swamp, Maya felt the Shadow's corruption traveling through the stone of Zali. The stone began to crack. The silence was trying to shatter the Sentinel from the inside out. "I won't let you turn them into ghosts again," Maya hissed. She took a shard of broken drone glass and sliced her palm, the palm with the scar. She pressed her bleeding hand against Zali's stone forehead. The biological met the digital. The ancient met the modern. Maya's DNA, the literal ink of her ancestors, acted as a firewall. She didn't send code, she sent emotion. She sent the feeling of a mother's hug, the smell of rain on dry earth, the taste of a first meal after a long hunt. The silence, which was a creature of cold logic and empty voids, couldn't process the complexity of human love and grief. The digital corruption buckled. The shadow virus began to delete itself, unable to survive in a network filled with the warmth of a living soul. The dark reset. The screens went black. The power grids across North America groaned and shut down. A great dark settled over the continent. In the silence of the blackout, something miraculous happened. People stepped out of their homes. Without the noise of their devices, they looked at the stars. They looked at the earth beneath their feet. They didn't remember the specifics yet. That would come in 2026, but they felt a presence. They felt the runner passing them in the dark. They felt the dream moving in the wind. Maya fell back into the mud, exhausted. Zali's stone form had softened, looking less like rock and more like a woman sleeping. "The message is in the wires now," Maya whispered to the stars. "You can't delete the truth once it's been felt." In Chicago, Leo sat in his dark office, watching the city lights flicker out. He picked up a pen and a piece of paper, the first time he had used one in years. By the light of a single candle, he drew a circle with a dot in the center. The root. The silence was retreating to its final stronghold, the deep subconscious mind of humanity. The final battle was no longer in the woods or the wires. It was in the heart. The air in North America didn't just turn cold, it turned non-existent. In the final hours of 2026, the atmosphere began to thin into a vacuum. The silence was no longer just a memory thief. It was an entropic force, unmaking the molecules of the earth. Maya stood at the base of Monk's Mound in Cahokia, her boots sinking into mud that felt like it was turning into smoke. Beside her stood Leo, the systems architect from Chicago. He looked pale, his hands trembling as he held a tablet that was barely functioning, its screen flickering with the root symbol. "The digital grid is dead," Leo shouted over a wind that made no sound. "But the data, the memories we uploaded, they're still vibrating in the ley lines. The Earth is acting like a giant hard drive, but it's crashing." The return of the shadow. From the summit of the great mound, a pillar of absolute darkness erupted. It wasn't smoke, it was a void, a hole in reality that began to pull everything towards it. Trees were uprooted and vanished into the blackness without a sound. Cars on the distant highway were stretched like taffy before disappearing. Then the shadow took its final physical form. It manifested as a titan made of every person it had ever erased. Thousands of faces, the high priests of Cahokia, the Spanish soldiers, the factory workers of the 1800s, swirled within its translucent, oily skin. It had no voice, yet the collective scream of 1,000,000 forgotten souls vibrated in Maya's teeth. "I am the end of the sentence," the shadow posed. "I am the period at the end of the human dream. Give up the root, and I will make the transition painless. Resist, and I will make your eternity a conscious scream in the dark." The 3 keys. Maya looked at her palm. The silver scar was now a blinding white. She realized that to defeat the silence, they didn't need a weapon, they needed a conductor. "Leo, the ley lines," Maya cried. "We have to ground the memory. If we can't speak the name, we have to become the name." She reached into her bag and pulled out the root stone, the flint swallowed by Zali, recovered from the swamp. It was no longer stone, it was a pulsing heart of amber light. The first key, the bone. Maya placed the root stone into a small indentation at the very center of the mound, the navel of the earth. The second key, the wire. Leo knelt and drove a copper grounding rod through the stone and into the earth, connecting the ancient flint to the modern electromagnetic field of the valley. The third key, the blood. Maya and Leo joined hands over the rod. The ancient blood of the Sun Clan met the modern mind of the New World. The great invocation. The shadow lunged, a claw of pure void swinging towards them. But before it could strike, the ground beneath Cahokia exploded, not with fire, but with light. The spirits of the ancestors didn't rise as ghosts, they rose as stories. Suddenly, the air was filled with the holographic projections of 1,000,000 lives. A woman grinding corn, a boy playing chunky, a runner crossing a river. The silence tried to swallow them, but there were too many. Every life ever lived in the valley was being replayed at once, a massive system restore of the human spirit. Maya felt her consciousness expanding.
She saw Kalen standing right behind her, his hand on her shoulder. She saw Naya. She saw Zali. "Now," Kalen's voice echoed in her mind. "Speak the dream." Maya didn't say a name. She didn't say a word. She let out a primal cry, a sound that contained the...
The year is 10,000 BC. The glaciers are retreating, leaving behind a scarred, weeping earth. The mammoths are dying, and the first people are crossing the land bridge into a world that has no names. Among them is Aiken, the first runner. He does not carry messages between cities, for there are no cities. He carries the fire of language. At this time, human thoughts are not words. They are colors, smells, and raw vibrations. The discovery of the mirror stone. Deep in a cave that would one day sit beneath the foundations of Cahokia, Aiken found a shard of the heavens. It was a meteorite of pure obsidian, pulsing with a cold, rhythmic light. When Aiken touched it, he didn't see the cave. He saw the future. He saw the great mounds of the Sun Clan. He saw the iron ships of the Spaniards. He saw the glowing screens of the modern world, but he saw them all as noise. The mirror stone whispered to him. It wasn't a god. It was a cosmic vacuum. It was the silence in its infancy. It told Aiken that human memory was a burden, a heavy, painful backpack of grief, war, and loss. "Give me your stories," the stone pulsed, "and I will give you peace. No more mourning for the dead, no more fear of the dark, only the great stillness." The birth of the shadow. Aiken, weary from the frozen trek and the death of his kin, made a terrible mistake. He spoke the first word. He gave the mirror stone a name, Ka-Os, the eater of breath. The moment the name left his lips, the stone cracked. A shadow leaked out, not a ghost, but a sentient lack of light. It wrapped itself around Aiken's shadow, fusing with him. Aiken realized too late that by naming the void, he had given it a physical anchor in the world. The shadow began to feed. It ate the memory of the mammoths. It ate the language of the first people. The first sacrifice. Aiken's daughter, Sela, saw her father changing. His skin was turning to glass. His eyes were becoming hollow. She realized that her father was becoming the first stalker. Sela was the first to understand the power of the root. She didn't fight the shadow with a spear. She fought it with a song. She composed a melody that had no words, a song of the wind, the water, and the beating heart. She lured Aiken / the shadow deep into the earth, to the very spot where the grand plaza of Cahokia would one day stand. "If you want the dream," Sela cried, "you must take it all, but you cannot take what is not spoken." She used a shard of flint, the original rootstone, to seal the cave. She sacrificed her own life to become the first shield. She turned herself into a pillar of salt and earth, burying the shadow beneath miles of sediment. The burden of the runner. But the shadow was not dead. It was trapped in a dream sleep. It could only wake up if a human reached out to it. It could only grow if a civilization became too loud, too arrogant, or too forgetful. Before she died, Sela sent a psychic pulse out into the bloodlines of the first people. "There will always be a runner," the pulse whispered. "There will always be a keeper. When the mounds rise, the shadow will stir. When the iron comes, the shadow will wake. When the wires hum, the shadow will strike." The eternal cycle. The scene shifts through a montage of time. We see the Adena people building the first small mounds, sensing the hum beneath the earth. We see the Hopewell traders carrying obsidian across the continent, unknowingly spreading pieces of the mirror stone. Finally, we see Galen in AD 1150, standing on the finished monk's mound, feeling the silence scratching at the soles of his feet. Galen wasn't just a messenger for a king. He was the reincarnation of Aiken's dead. He was the one destined to fix the mistake made 10,000 years ago. The final reveal. Back in 2026, Maya stands over the green sprout on the mound.
She digs a small hole and finds a piece of ancient, weathered bone. It is a flute, carved from a mammoth's tusk. She puts it to her lips and plays the Song of Selah. As the notes drift over the modern city of St. Louis, the earth itself seems to sigh. The 10,000-year war is finally over. The shadow is no longer a monster. It is just a memory. And memory, once shared, can no longer hunt you. The dream was spoken, the silence was heard, and the runner finally stopped running. The year is AD 2150. A century has passed since the Great Awakening on Monk's Mound. The world of steel, glass, and digital noise did not crumble. It evolved. The cities of the 20th century are no longer concrete scars on the earth. They are biomounds. Inspired by the geometry of Cahokia, massive skyscrapers are now covered in living moss and solar-sensitive vines, breathing in rhythm with the atmosphere. The silence is no longer a predator. It is a battery. The School of the Runners. In the center of the new St. Louis stands the Aiken-Kalin Academy. It is not a school of books, but a school of presence. Young men and women, known as the New Runners, are trained to navigate the memory grid, a global network of light that has replaced the old, cold internet. They don't carry data packets, they carry vibrations. A young runner named Ilara stands at the summit of a restored monk's mound. She wears a suit made of woven fiber and crushed obsidian. On her palm is a birthmark, a faint silver-gray circle. The wind is heavy today. Her mentor, an elderly Leo, sustained by the life force of the rootstone, says behind her. The ancient voices are restless. Someone in the Great Delta is forgetting a name. The restoration of the map. The new runners have a sacred task to ensure that no story is ever lost again. When a person dies, their dream is not buried. It is uploaded into the earth core, joining the billions of other lives in a glowing subterranean sea of gold. Ilara closes her eyes. She taps into the ley lines. Suddenly, she is not in 2150. She is everywhere at once. She sees the mammoths of 10,000 BC. She sees Asali standing in the swamp. She sees the iron ships of the Spaniards. To her, time is not a line. It is a circle. The final guardian. But even in this utopia, there is a shadow. In the deepest reaches of the dark web of memory, a small, cold spark remains. It is the last fragment of the mirror stone. It knows that humanity's greatest weakness is not forgetfulness, but certainty. If we remember everything, Ilara whispers, do we lose the mystery of the unknown? She realized that the silence was not just a curse. It was a rest. It was the space between the notes of a song. Without the silence, the music becomes a scream. The gift of the runner. Ilara makes a choice that changes the future. She doesn't strengthen the memory grid. Instead, she creates sacred voids. She designates certain areas of the world, the deep forests, the high peaks, the center of the oceans, as places of the unspoken. In these zones, the technology fails, the memories vanish, the silence is allowed to live, not as a hunter, but as a sanctuary. We must always have a place where we can be new, Ilara tells the Council of Elders. We must always have a dream that hasn't been spoken yet. The final breath. The story ends where it began. A lone figure walks across the grand plaza of a reconstructed Cahokia. He is tall, his skin the color of rich earth, his eyes holding the light of 1,000 years. He is not a ghost, and he is not a man. He is the spirit of the road. He stops at the base of the great mound. He picks up a small green leaf and lets it go. The leaf doesn't fall. It floats upward, caught in a breeze that carries the scent of 10,000 harvests. The runner smiles. For the first time in eternity, he doesn't have a message to deliver. He has nowhere to go. He is already there. The legacy. The unspoken dream is now the living dream. It is in the way the children play in the grass. It is in the way the engineers built the bridges. It is in the way the stars look down at a world that finally knows its own name, but is wise enough to keep some secrets. The end of the saga of the Sun Clan.
The year is AD 10,000. The Earth is no longer a planet of soil and water. It has become a living library of light. The great mounds of Cahokia are now the central processors of a planetary consciousness. Humanity has evolved beyond flesh, existing as dream forms that can traverse the galaxy in a heartbeat.
But at the edge of the universe, the entropy of the silence has returned. It is no longer a shadow or a virus. It is the natural cooling of the cosmos. The stars are blinking out. The great memory is beginning to fade because there is no more heat to sustain the stories. The assembly of the ages. In the center of the grand plaza of the celestial Cahokia, a ritual begins that has been prepared for 10,000 years. It is the summoning of the lineage. Using the rootstone technology, the new runners do not just call upon memories, they pull the actual souls of the past forward through time. Aiken stands there, holding the first fire. Kalen stands beside him, his legs still dusty from the trails of 1150. Zali emerges from her stone slumber, her indigo tattoos glowing like neon. Maya and Leo arrive, representing the bridge of the 21st century. They are the 5 pillars of the dream. The great weaving. The universe is tearing at the seams. To stop the total erasure of existence, the 5 pillars must perform the final run. They must carry the total memory of humanity into the very heart of the black hole at the center of the galaxy, the original mouth of the silence. If we enter the void, Kalen says, his voice vibrating with the power of an eon, there is no coming back. We will become the fabric of the next universe. We will be the laws of physics for the dreamers who come after us. Aiken nods, the first man to speak a word. It is why we were born, to be the ink, not the reader. The ascent to the core. The 5 of them join hands. They don't use a ship. They use the song of Sila. As they accelerate toward the galactic center, the physical world dissolves. They pass through the history of everything. They see the mammoths, the Spanish galleons, the digital satellites, and the Martian colonies. They see every tear shed and every laugh shared. The shadow, the ancient chaos, is waiting at the event horizon. It is no longer a monster. It is a giant mirror. It reflects back to them every mistake humanity ever made. It shows them the wars, the greed, and the moments they forgot their own names. Why save a dream that is so full of nightmares? The mirror pulses. The answer of the runner. Kalen steps forward, his hand glowing with the silver scar. He doesn't look away from the nightmares. He embraces them. Because the nightmare makes the dawn beautiful, Kalen shouts. The silence is just the paper. We are the story written on it. He lunges into the mirror, but he doesn't break it. He melts into it. One by one, the 5 pillars dive into the void. Aiken gives the void the concept of beginning. Zali gives the void the concept of ancestry. Maya gives the void the concept of discovery. Leo gives the void the concept of structure. Kalen gives the void the concept of the path. The big bang of the dream. The black hole doesn't collapse, it inverts. The silence is finally, totally, and permanently filled. The darkness of the universe is replaced by a shimmering golden substance, the luminous ether. Every atom in the next universe will now carry a memory of the Sun Clan. The stars don't just burn, they sing. The planets don't just orbit, they dance. The final silence. In the new universe, on a planet that hasn't been named yet, a small creature crawls out of a warm ocean. It looks up at the sky. It doesn't have a language yet. It doesn't have a name. But as it looks at the stars, it feels a strange, comforting rhythm in its chest. Thud, thud. Thud, thud. It is the heartbeat of a runner. Somewhere, in the white space between the dimensions, a man and a woman sit on a bench made of starlight. Is it done, Kalen? Naya asks, leaning her head on his shoulder. Kalen looks at his palm. The scar is gone. The hand is smooth. The message has finally been delivered to the only place that matters. Everywhere. It's done, he whispers. Now we can finally just be. They close their eyes, and for the first time in 10,000 years, there is no more running, only the beautiful spoken peace of a dream that will never end.
The year is unknown. In the dimensions between the ancient past and the modern wire, there existed a place called the Gray. It was a realm made of the things humanity had forgotten, the names of lost pets, the melodies of lullabies no longer sung, and the faces of strangers passed on the street. In this realm, the silence was not a monster, it was the atmosphere. Elu was a girl born of the Gray. She was not made of flesh, but of static.
Her hair flickered like a television with no signal, and her eyes were the color of a winter sky over the Mississippi. She was a scavenger of dreams, the loom of forgotten things. Ilu lived in a structure that looked like a distorted version of Monk's Mound, built entirely out of discarded whispers. She spent her days at the loom, weaving together the fragments of memories that fell through the cracks of the physical world. "Why do you keep them, Ilu?" her companion, a fox made of starlight named Sook, asked. "The humans have thrown these away. They don't want them anymore." "Because if a memory has no home, it becomes a shadow," Ilu whispered, her voice sounding like the rustle of dry leaves. "And if there are too many shadows, the silence gets hungry. I am the one who keeps the hunger at bay by giving the forgotten a place to stay." The breach of the runner. One day the sky of the gray tore open. A streak of silver light cut through the static. It was Kalen, during his transition from the 12th century to the modern ritual. He was moving so fast through the time stream that he left a trail of living blood behind him. In the gray, blood was more valuable than gold. It was weight. It was reality. The shadows of the gray, the distorted, eyeless versions of the Sun Clan, smelled the blood. They began to swarm toward the rift, hoping to hitch a ride on Kalen's back and escape into the physical world. "They'll destroy the city," Ilu cried. "If the gray leaks into the green, the dream will turn into a nightmare." The sacrifice of the static. Ilu grabbed her loom. She didn't have a flint knife or a stone. She had only the web of whispers she had spent an eternity weaving. She ran toward the rift, her static body flickering wildly. As the shadows reached for Kalen's heels, Ilu threw the web. It didn't kill the shadows, it clothed them. The web of whispers wrapped around the monsters, giving them back the memories they had lost. The eyeless creatures suddenly saw their mother's faces. The jagged claws turned back into human hands. The hunger for destruction turned into a hunger for grief. They stopped chasing the runner. They sat down in the gray and began to weep. The price of the protection. But the rift was still open. The vacuum of the physical world was pulling the gray toward it. Ilu realized that the only way to seal the hole was to stay in the gap herself. She stepped into the tear in reality, placing her body between the forgotten and the living. As Kalen vanished into the future, Ilu felt herself becoming the border. She was no longer a girl. She was the glitch in the system. She was the reason why sometimes you walk into a room and forget why you were there. She was the reason why you see a shadow out of the corner of your eye that vanishes when you look at it. "I am the silence that protects the sound," Ilu whispered as the rift closed around her. The secret connection. Back in the 21st century, Maya is looking at a piece of broken pottery. She feels a sudden, inexplicable wave of sadness. She feels as if someone she never met has just saved her life. She looks at a flickering light bulb in her tent. The flickering isn't random. It's a code. ... "Thank you," Maya whispers to the empty air. In the gray, Ilu smiles. She is the guardian of the gap. She is the one who ensures that when the runner speaks the dream, there is a world left to hear it. The conclusion of the gray. The gray still exists. It sits right behind your reflection in the mirror. It sits in the space between your heartbeats. And as long as Ilu stands at the border, the silence is not a weapon, but a secret. The dream is spoken, the gray is sealed, and the runner is never truly alone. The year is AD 1180. Cahokia is at its zenith. but the rot of the silence has already begun to prick at the edges of the city. While the great Sun King sits atop his mound, a mile away in the district of potters, a woman named Anaya is working the clay. She is not a warrior, she is not a prophet, she is a memory stitcher. The clay that remembers. In Cahokia, the pottery wasn't just for water, it was for time. Anaya had a gift, the vibration of the hand. As she spun her wheel, she whispered the stories of her neighbors into the wet earth. The story of the boy who found a blue jay's feather, the story of the baker who gave away extra bread during the frost, the story of the two lovers who met by the creek under a blood moon. "Why do you talk to the pots, Mother?" her son Tallow asked. "Because the great mound is built of dirt, Tallow," Anaya said, her hands caked in red clay. "But the city is built of this. If the great sun falls, the pyramids will remain empty. But if we forget how we loved one another, the pyramids will be empty husks. I am putting our breath into the fire." The night of the shattering. One evening, the shadow at Cahokia sent its first wave of true silence into the potter's district. It didn't come with a roar. It came as a cold wind that wiped the names off people's tongues. Anaya felt it. She felt her own name beginning to slip away, a mental fog that tasted like ash. She gathered her hundreds of pots. She didn't hide them. She took Tallow to the great pit, the place where the city took the earth to build the mounds. "We must bury the breath," Anaya whispered. As the pale ones, the eyeless creatures began to crawl through the thatched streets of the district, Anaya and Tallow laid the pots in the deep earth. She didn't just stack them, she arranged them in the shape of the root. The song in the kiln. The shadows reached the pit. They didn't see the gold or the weapons. They saw the clay. They hated it. Clay was reality. It was definition. Anaya stood over the buried pots. She didn't run. She began to sing the song of the potter's wheel. It was a rhythmic, grinding sound that matched the rotation of the earth. The shadows lunged, but as they touched Anaya, the fire of the kiln within her erupted. She didn't burn. She hardened. She turned into a terracotta sentinel, her arms wrapped around the pit. She became a living vessel. The shadows couldn't get to the pots because Anaya had become the lid. The 2026 discovery. Fast forward to the modern era. Maya and Leo are excavating a site near a highway construction project. They find a trash pit. But as Maya brushes away the dirt, she finds a woman made of fired clay, standing upright, and beneath her hundreds of perfectly preserved pots. Maya picks up a shard. She doesn't see an artifact. She hears it. The moment she touches the clay, she hears the baker's laugh. She smells the blue jay's feather. She feels the love of the two teenagers by the creek. "Leo," Maya says, tears streaming down her face. "The kings gave us the history, but this woman, she gave us the life." The final connection. The archive of the sun was never lost. It was just waiting for a hand to touch the clay. Because of Anaya, the dream that Kaylin carried wasn't just a political message. It was a human heartbeat. The silence could erase the names of kings, but it could never erase the sound of a mother whispering to her son while the wheel turned. The dream is spoken, the clay is fired, and the archive is finally open. In the epilogue of the Potter. In the new universe from Chapter 18, the first planets aren't made of cold rock. They are made of a warm, vibrating substance that feels like wet clay. And the first sentient beings to walk those worlds don't build monuments to war. They sit in circles, and they begin to create. The end of the Potter's Tale.
The year is AD 1145, 5 years before the Great Silence. In the shadow of the smoking temple fires, a secret chamber existed deep beneath the foundations of the North Mound. It was a place where the sun never reached, lit only by the low blue glow of volcanic glass. Here sat Vaughn, the High Chronicler. He was not a man of the fields, but a man of the deep sight. Before him stood a mirror made of a single massive slab of obsidian, polished so finely it didn't reflect the room, it reflected the void, the temptation of the static. Vaughn was obsessed with the leaking time. He had seen the tremors and the reality of Cahokia, the moments where a trader would walk behind a granary and never come out the other side. The universe is a cup with a hole in the bottom, Vaughn whispered to his acolytes, their faces painted with the black soot of the mirror. The gods are bleeding out. If we do not capture the blood of the stars, we will all vanish into the great gray. Vaughn didn't want to stop the silence. He wanted to bottle it. He believed that if he could trap the essence of the forgetting, he could use it to erase his enemies. He could make a rival king disappear from the very memories of his own children. He could rewrite the history of the Sun Clan to make himself the eternal architect. The ritual of the glass eye. The order began to feed the mirror. They didn't use blood, they used truths. They would kidnap the city's storytellers, the poets, and the keepers of the lineage. They would force them to stare into the obsidian mirror and speak their most sacred secrets. As the words hit the glass, the mirror would drink them. The glass would turn from black to a sickly, pulsing green. The storytellers would walk out of the chamber as hollows, their eyes wide and milky, their minds as empty as a dry well. "The mirror is growing heavy," one acolyte whispered, his hands trembling. "It's starting to breathe, Master Vaughn. When I touch it, I hear the sound of 1,000 people screaming, but they have no mouths." "Patience," Vaughn hissed, his own reflection beginning to distort in the glass. "Once the mirror is full, the Sun King will be a puppet. I will speak the word, and the world will be whatever I say it is." The runner's first glimpse. A young Kalen, only a novice messenger at the time, was tasked with delivering a bundle of medicinal herbs to the North Mound. He took a wrong turn through a service tunnel and stumbled upon the bronze doors of the mirror chamber. He pressed his ear to the cold metal. He didn't hear chanting. He heard a vacuum. It was a sound that pulled at his very soul, trying to drag his name out through his ears. Kalen peered through a crack in the door. He saw Fawn standing before the glowing green obsidian. He saw the mirror ripple like water. A hand, pale, elongated, and eyeless, reached out from the center of the glass and touched Fawn's forehead. Fawn didn't scream. He laughed, a cold metallic sound that shattered the nearby clay lamps. "The mirror isn't a tool, you fool," Kalen whispered to himself, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It's an invitation." The theft of the reflection. Kalen realized he couldn't fight the order with a knife. He did something far more dangerous. He reached into his mouch and pulled out a small, jagged piece of mica, a stone that reflects light with a shimmering, chaotic brilliance. As Vaughn prepared to utter the final binding word, Kalen threw the mica into the chamber. The shard hit the obsidian mirror just as the green light peaked. The chaotic, multifaceted reflection of the mica acted like a prism. It broke the single truth of the mirror into a billion fractured possibilities. The mirror screamed, a psychic blast that leveled the acolytes and sent Fawn flying against the stone wall. The green light imploded, sucking the Order's stolen memories back into the void, but leaving behind a permanent crack in the reality of the city. The legacy of the glass eye. Kalen fled before he could be caught. The Order of the Glass Eye was disbanded, their master driven mad by the visions of 1,000 futures he couldn't control. But the damage was done. The crack in the North Mound became the gateway through which the shadow would eventually enter in Chapter 1. The obsidian mirror didn't break. It shattered into millions of tiny shards that were carried away by the wind, buried in the soil of the valley. The Modern Connection, 2026. In the final year, Leo finds one of these shards while surveying the ruins. He thinks it's just a piece of ancient debris. But when he looks into it, he doesn't see his face. He sees Vaughn, 500 years in the past, still staring out from the glass, waiting for someone to finish the sentence. Leo throws the shard into the Mississippi. Some stories, Leo says, are better left in the dark. The Epilogue of the Eye.
In the New Universe, Chapter 18, there are no mirrors. The people don't look at their own reflections to find out who they are. They look at each other. They understand that the only true mirror is the memory of a friend. The dream is spoken, the mirror is shattered, and the eye is finally closed.
The year is AD 1148, 2 years before the city fell. Kalen, now a seasoned runner, was sent on a mission that no other messenger would take. He was to travel beyond the Great Lakes to the frozen veins of the old copper complex, where the earth itself breathed metallic fire. The Sun King was desperate. He knew the silence was coming, and he knew that stone and wood could not hold a melody against the void. He needed the resonant metal, the forge of the Skywalkers. Kalen reached the shores of Lake Superior, a place where the water was so cold it could shatter a man's heart. There, he met the Anishinaabe coppersmiths, a tribe that did not build mounds, but dug deep into the mother veins. Their leader was a woman named Miskwa, her arms stained a permanent oxidized green. She didn't hammer the metal, she sang it into shape. "The king wants bells," Miskwa said, her voice like grinding gravel. "He thinks noise will scare the shadow, but noise is just chaotic silence. He needs harmonics." The casting of the 12 bells. Miskwa agreed to help, but the price was steep. Kalen had to give his own breath to the forge. For 12 days and 12 nights, the smiths melted the raw native copper in pits lined with charcoal and sturgeon oil. As the metal turned into a glowing orange liquid, Kalen stood over the crucible and recited the lineage of the sun. He spoke the names of the first ancestors, the stories of the corn mothers, and the secret jokes of the trickster spirits. The metal didn't just melt, it absorbed. They cast 12 massive copper plates, each shaped like the wings of a thunderbird. When struck, these were not just bells, they were frequency anchors. They were designed to vibrate at the exact pitch of the human soul. The long carry. The return journey was a nightmare. The silence knew what Kalen was carrying. It sent the mistwalkers, creatures made of freezing fog, to dampen the vibration of the copper. Kalen had to carry the 12 plates on a wooden frame strapped to his back. They weighed over 100 pounds, but the weight wasn't physical. It was the weight of the stories trapped within the metal. Every step he took, the plates would chime softly, sending out a ripple of gold light that pushed back the mist for a few yards. He ran through the forests of the north, his feet bleeding, his lungs screaming. He wasn't just running for Cahokia, he was running to keep the frequency of life from flatlining. The resonance at the North Mound. Kalen arrived back at the city just as Vaughn's obsidian mirror from the previous chapter began to leak its final poison. He climbed to the highest point of the city and hung the 12 plates from a cedar gallows. As the shadow lunged from the mirror, Kalen hit a striker made of elkhorn and hit the center plate. Tong. The sound didn't travel through the air, it traveled through the bone. The vibration hit the shadow like a physical wall. The green light of the mirror flickered and dimmed. For a brief moment, the city was held in a perfect chord. The people who had begun to forget their names suddenly stood up, their eyes clearing as the copper vibration reset their minds. The shattered chime. But the shadow was too vast to be stopped by sound alone. It focused its energy on the cedar gallows, snapping the wood like a dry twig. The 12 copper plates fell, tumbling down the side of the mound and burying themselves deep in the mud. The bells are silenced, Vaughn screamed from the depths of his madness. But Kalen knew better. He looked at the mud where the copper had vanished. The vibration hadn't stopped, it had moved into the earth. The copper plates were now tuning forks for the very soil of the Mississippi Valley. The 2026 connection. In the modern era, Leo is confused by a geological hum that his sensors are picking up near the highway. It's a constant, low-frequency 432 Hz tone that seems to be coming from miles underground. It's not a machine, Leo says, looking at his frequency analyzer. It's a heartbeat made of metal. It is the 12 bells of Kalen. They are still ringing, 10 centuries later, holding the tectonic plates of the dream together. The epilogue of the copper. In the New Universe, Chapter 18, there are no iron, there are no machines. The people build their homes out of singing metal that vibrates with the songs of their ancestors. And whenever a child feels sad or lonely, they simply press their ear to the ground and hear the faint, distant chime of Kalen's bells, telling them that they are remembered. The dream is spoken, the copper is cast, and the resonance never ends.
The year is AD 1149, 1 year before the silence became absolute. The city of Cahokia was starving, not for calories, but for identity. The great Sun King's obsession with the shadow had led him to neglect the fields. The maize was turning gray, and the squash vines were shriveling into shapes that looked like grasping fingers. Deep in the southern precinct, in a garden hidden behind a wall of woven cane, lived Nibi. She was the oldest woman in the valley, her skin so wrinkled it looked like the topographical map of the river itself. She was the keeper of the seventh seed. The genetic library. In the ancient world, seeds were not just food, they were time capsules. Nibi didn't just plant them, she breathed into them. Every evening she sat among her stalks of great blue maize and whispered the genealogy of the clan. This seed remembers the flood of the Great Father. This seed remembers the year the sky turned red. This seed remembers the name of every child born under the dog star. Nibi knew that the silence was a parasite that lived in the mind, but the mind is fragile. The soil, however, is eternal. She was engineering a biological backup of the human soul. The blight of the pale ones. The shadow sent its scouts, the Blightbringers, to Nibi's garden. They were insects with translucent wings that hummed at a frequency that caused plants to forget how to photosynthesize. Where they landed, the green turned to ash. "You cannot eat the memories of the earth," Nibi cried, standing in the center of her garden with a staff made of lightning-struck hickory. She realized that the silence wanted to erase the very taste of home. If the people forgot the flavor of their traditional bread, they would lose the physical connection to their ancestors. The ritual of the buried husk. As the city began to crumble around her, Nibi performed the final planting. She didn't plant the seeds in the sun. She dug a hole 7 feet deep, lining it with the charred bones of a 1,000-year-old oak. She took 7 kernels of the great blue maize. These weren't normal seeds. They had been soaked in the copper water from Miskwa's forge, chapter 22, and stained with the indigo ink of the keepers, chapter 11. "Go to sleep," Nibi whispered to the earth. "Wait for the one who carries the silver scar. Wait for the day when the metal bells ring again. Only then sprout." She covered the seeds with a layer of mica and sealed the pit with a slab of limestone. As the silence finally reached her garden, Nibi sat atop the stone and turned into a pillar of dried corn husks. She didn't die. She became a mulch, a protective layer of biological memory that the shadow couldn't penetrate. The 2026 resurrection. In the modern era, Maya is exploring a sinkhole that opened up after a massive thunderstorm. At the bottom, she finds a pocket of air sealed for 1,000 years. She finds the limestone slab. Beneath it, in the dry, cold earth, are the 7 blue kernels. They look like sapphires. "They're still alive," Maya whispers, her heart racing. She takes the seeds to a laboratory, but they won't sprout under artificial lights. They won't sprout with chemical fertilizers. Maya realizes they need recognition. She takes the seeds back to the summit of Monk's Mount. She pricks her finger, the finger with the silver scar, and lets a single drop of her blood touch the soil. She begins to hum the song of Scylla, chapter 15. Within seconds, the earth heaves. A stalk of maize, a deep iridescent blue, shoots out of the ground. It grows 3 feet in a minute. As the leaves unfurl, they don't rustle, they whisper. Everyone standing on the mound suddenly smells the scent of a 1,000-year-old harvest. They feel a sudden, overwhelming sense of home. The silence in their modern minds, the anxiety, the digital static, the loneliness, is wiped away by the biological frequency of the plant. The epilogue of the seed. In the new universe, chapter 18, there are no grocery stores. There is no hunger. The people eat the fruit of memory, and with every bite, they understand another piece of who they are. They don't have to study history, they ingest it. And in the center of the great galaxy mound, there grows a single, towering stalk of blue maize, its roots reaching into the very fabric of space-time, ensuring that the dream will always have enough to eat. The year is AD 1150, the final months before the great city became a ghost. The high priest Koi sat atop the emerald mound, his eyes white with cataracts, but his mind sharp as a splinter of obsidian. He wasn't looking at the stars, he was looking at the shadows between them. "The moon is a shield," Koi whispered to a young Naya who had been sent to bring him water. "It catches the light of the sun and reflects it back to us, so the silence cannot breathe. But the shield is thinning." The lunar alignment. Koi had spent 80 years tracking the 18.6-year lunar standstill, a rare cycle where the moon rises and sets at its furthest points on the horizon.
He knew that the silence was tied to the tides of the silver light. When the moon was at its weakest, the shadow was at its strongest. "We cannot save the city," Koi told Naya, his trembling hand pointing at the lunar craters. "But we can save the coordinates. If the world forgets where it is, it will drift into the void forever. We must mark the moon." The ritual of the silver smoke. Koi and the last of the Star Watchers gathered at the summit of the North Mound. They didn't use stone or copper. They used smoke. They burned a mixture of white sage, powdered mica, and the resin of the ancient cedar. As the thick, iridescent smoke rose toward the full moon, Koi used a series of polished mica mirrors to focus the moonlight through the smoke. He wasn't just sending a signal, he was etching. Using the principles of light memory, Koi projected the entire map of the Mississippi Valley, every mound, every river bend, and every secret path of the runners, directly onto the lunar surface. To the naked eye, it looked like a flickering haze, but to the dream sight, it was a permanent engraving on the face of the moon. The 2026 revelation. In the modern era, Leo is at the Adler Planetarium, looking through a high-powered digital telescope during a rare lunar eclipse. He's looking for lunar swirls, strange magnetic anomalies on the moon's surface. Suddenly, the digital filters on his telescope glitch. The craters don't look like impacts anymore. They look like mounds. "Maya, you need to see this," Leo whispers over the radio. As the Earth's shadow passes over the moon, the silver smoke map of AD 1150 begins to glow. It's a perfect topographical match for the Cahokia site. But there's a missing piece, a beacon located at a coordinate that doesn't exist on any modern map. It's a treasure map, Maya realizes, staring at the screen. But the treasure isn't gold, it's the frequency. The moon is broadcasting the reset code for the Earth's atmosphere. The final transmission. Leo realizes that the modern satellites, the iron spiders in the sky, are blocking the moon's signal. The silence in the digital age is literally a layer of electronic noise. "We have to shut it down," Leo says. "Everything, for 1 minute." Using the blood code, Chapter 13, Leo triggers a global EMP, electromagnetic pulse. For 60 seconds, the world goes dark. The internet dies. The satellites go silent. In that minute of absolute quiet, the moon's reflection hits the waters of the Mississippi. The silver map connects with the copper bells, Chapter 22. The Earth's magnetic field reboots. The static in human brains clears. For 1 minute, every person on Earth looks up at the moon and sees not a rock, but a library. They remember the names of the stars. They remember the feel of the wind. The silence shatters because it has no place to hide in a world that can see its own history written in the sky. The epilogue of the moon. In the new universe, Chapter 18, the moon is not a dead rock, it is a lighthouse. It glows with a soft blue light that pulses in time with the heartbeat of the people. And when the new runners want to travel to other galaxies, they don't use rockets. They simply step into the moonlight and walk along the silver map that Koi drew 10,000 years ago. The dream is spoken, the moon is mapped, and the sky is finally home.
The year is AD 1150, the final week of the Sun Clan's reign. The city is a hive of panic, but in the highest room of the tallest cedar tower, a woman named Sora is not packing her bags. She is stripping the bark from willow branches and gathering the molted feathers of 10,000 eagles. Sora was the first aeronaut. She didn't want to fly, she wanted to anchor. The aerodynamics of the soul. The Sun Clan believed that the silence was a heavy gas, a spiritual smog that settled in the valleys and the low places. To keep the dream alive, it had to be lifted into the upper blue, where the air is too thin for the shadow to breathe. Sora was building the great sky loom. It was a kite the size of a longhouse, shaped like the great underwater panther, but light as a dragonfly's wing. The fabric was made of spider silk and beaten mulberry bark, treated with the resonant copper. Chapter 22. "The shadow is coming for our breath, Sora," the runner Kaylin said, stopping at her tower for one final message. "Why do you play with toys?" "This isn't a toy, runner," Sora said, her fingers moving like frantic spiders. "The earth is about to become a grave. I am making sure the lungs of the city stay in the sky." The ritual of the rising breath. As the Pale Ones breached the southern gate, Sora launched the loom. It didn't just catch the wind, it harmonized with it. As the kite rose higher and higher, Sora tied a series of aeolian whistles to the tether. These were small bone tubes carved with the names of the families of Cahokia. As the wind blew through the tubes, the kite began to sing. It wasn't a song of music, it was a song of data. The pitch, the duration, and the vibration of the whistles were a physical recording of the city's heartbeat. The 2026 turbulence. In the modern era, Leo is monitoring a weather station in the St. Louis Highlands. He's looking for infrasound, sound waves below the range of human hearing. There's a spike, Leo says, tapping his screen. Every time the wind hits 40 miles per hour, the atmosphere over the mounds starts to broadcast a 7 hertz signal. Maya looks up at the empty blue sky. The kite, Leo. Sora's kite. The silk didn't rot, it ionized. The great sky loom had spent 1,000 years in the jet stream. Over the centuries, the spider silk had collected static electricity and cosmic dust, turning the kite into a permanent, invisible atmospheric antenna. It had been singing the names of the Sun Clan into the clouds for 10 centuries, waiting for someone to build a radio that could hear it. The final downpour. Leo realizes that the silence in 2026 is manifesting as a drought of the mind. People are thirsty for meaning, but the air feels dry and empty. We need to bring the loom down, Leo says. Not the physical kite, but the charge. Using the copper grounding rod, chapter 14, Maya and Leo create a lightning path. They trigger a localized storm over the mounds. As the first bolt of lightning strikes the copper rod, it connects with the ionized sky loom 5 miles above. The rain that falls isn't normal water. Each drop is a liquid memory. As the people of the valley are soaked by the storm, they don't just get wet, they drown in the history of the wind. They feel the flight of the eagle. They hear the laughter of Sora. They understand the breath of the ancestors. The silence is washed away by a flood of atmospheric truth. The epilogue of the wind. In the new universe, chapter 18, the people don't have lungs. They breathe the light of the wind. Their thoughts are carried on the breeze, and they can talk to one another across entire continents by simply whispering into the air. And high above the golden mounds, the great sky loom still flies, no longer made of silk, but of pure, unyielding spirit, ensuring that the dream will always have enough air to sing. The year is AD 1150, the final night. The surface of Cahokia is burning with the green fire of the obsidian mirror, but beneath the Grand Plaza, a man named Hokan is opening a door that was never meant to be closed. Hokan was the guardian of the aquifer. He didn't believe in the sky. He believed in the weight of the water. The hydrology of the soul.